so soft that he almost dismissed it as his imagination. It was a whisper, distant and indistinct, like someone calling his name. Minhaj's stomach tightened. He strained to listen, but the sound was gone, replaced by the usual nocturnal chorus. Shaking his head, he tried to laugh it off. He was letting his grandfather's stories get to him, nothing more. But as he turned to go back inside, he saw it, a faint figure standing beneath the old tree in the courtyard. It was barely more than a silhouette, its edges blurred by the weak moonlight. Minhaj froze. His breath caught in his throat. The figure didn't move, didn't speak, but he felt its gaze fixed on him, heavy and unrelenting. He blinked, and it was gone. Minhaj stumbled back inside, locking the door behind him. His heart pounded in his chest as he leaned against the door, trying to catch his breath. The house was silent, but the silence felt wrong, like something was waiting just out of sight. The rest of the night passed in restless fragments. He lay awake in the small guest room, every creak of the floorboards and whisper of the wind setting his nerves on edge. When sleep finally came, it was fitful and filled with strange, disjointed dreams. He saw the traveler from his grandfather's story, his face pale and gaunt, his eyes wide with terror as he stood before the cursed hut. And in the shadows of the woods, something moved, something that wasn't human. When Minhaj awoke, the sun had already risen, but the house felt no less oppressive. The air was heavy, the kind of weight that pressed down on his chest and made it hard to breathe. His grandfather was nowhere to be seen, his room empty and the bed neatly made. Minhaj searched the house, calling out, but there was no answer. As he stepped into the courtyard, he noticed something strange beneath the old tree. The earth was disturbed, as though something had been buried there recently. His grandfather's words echoed in his mind. Every story has a kernel of truth. Minhaj stood frozen in the courtyard, his gaze fixed on the disturbed patch of earth beneath the old tree. The sunlight did little to dispel the sense of unease that had settled over him. The ground looked fresh, as though it had been dug up and hastily covered again. He couldn't shake the feeling that whatever lay beneath was not meant to be uncovered. A cool breeze rustled through the tree's gnarled branches, and for a moment, it sounded almost like a whisper. Minhaj stepped closer, his heart pounding in his chest. The whispers grew louder, not from the wind, but from somewhere deeper, almost inside his head. His breath quickened as he crouched near the disturbed earth, his hands trembling. He reached out, hesitating as the whispers morphed into faint, indistinct voices, calling his name in a chorus of urgency and dread. Before he could act, a sharp creak from the house snapped him out of his trance. He turned to see the front door swinging slowly open, the shadows inside stretching unnaturally long. A chill ran down his spine. He was certain he had locked the door. The air around him grew heavier, suffused with an unnatural stillness that made every sound, every rustle of leaves, every breath, feel amplified. Minhaj stepped cautiously toward the house, his senses on high alert. The whispers faded as he crossed the threshold, replaced by the oppressive silence that had haunted the house since his arrival. The dim light filtering through the curtains cast strange patterns on the walls, and the faint smell of damp wood and earth seemed stronger now. As he moved through the empty rooms, the floorboards groaned beneath his feet, each creak sounding like a warning. He called out for his grandfather, his voice shaky and uncertain. No response came, but the house felt alive in a way that was impossible to ignore. Shadows moved in the corners of his vision, and the air seemed to hum with a low, almost imperceptible vibration. He tried to convince himself it was just his imagination, but deep down, he knew better. As he approached the kitchen, a faint sound reached his ears, a soft, rhythmic tapping. It was coming from the far end of the hesitated, his hand hovering over the doorknob. The silence that followed was deafening, pressing against his ears like a physical weight. Summoning every ounce of courage, he opened the door and stepped out into the backyard. The light was dimmer here, the sun obscured by the thick canopy of trees. The air felt colder, sharper, as though the space had been untouched by the warmth of day. The yard was eerily still, the silence broken only by the faint rustle of leaves in the wind. Minhaj's eyes scanned the area, searching for the source of the sound, but he found nothing out of place. And then he saw it. At the edge of the yard, just beyond the reach of the sunlight, a figure stood motionless. It was a man, or at least the shape of one. His features were obscured, shrouded in shadow despite the daylight. Minhaj's stomach clenched as the figure raised a hand, pointing toward the tree in the courtyard. The gesture was slow, deliberate, and filled with an inexplicable sense of malice. Minhaj stumbled backward, his mind screaming at him to run, but his legs refused to obey. The figure didn't move, its form unnaturally still, like a painting come to life. The shadows around it seemed to pulse and writhe, stretching out toward Minhaj as though trying to pull him closer. A sudden crash from inside the house broke the spell. Minhaj turned, his heart racing, and ran back toward the porch. The figure remained rooted in place, its unyielding gaze burning into his back as he fled. Inside, the air felt colder than ever, and the faint sound of footsteps echoed through the hallways. He followed the noise, his instincts screaming at him to turn back. The footsteps led him to the small room where his grandfather kept his most treasured possessions: old photographs, trinkets from his youth, and the journal he always carried. The room was in disarray, the shelves overturned, and the journal lying open on the floor. Minhaj picked it up, his fingers trembling as he flipped through the pages. The entries were ordinary at first, detailing his grandfather's daily routines and musings about the village. But as Minhaj neared the end, the tone shifted. The writing grew erratic, the words scrawled in a frantic hand. His grandfather had written about strange dreams, voices calling to him in the night, and a growing sense of unease that he couldn't explain. The final entry sent a chill down Minhaj's spine. The tree, it knows. I shouldn't have disturbed it. If anyone finds this, leave the house. Don't look back. A low, guttural sound echoed from the hallway, pulling Minhaj from his thoughts. It was a laugh, deep and unnatural, reverberating through the house like a growl. He clutched the journal tightly, his knuckles white, and backed away from the door. The sound grew louder, closer, until it seemed to be coming from all around him. The lights flickered, casting the room into brief moments of darkness. In the flashes of light, Minhaj saw movement, shadows shifting and twisting, forming shapes that defied logic. A figure appeared in the doorway, its face obscured, but its presence overwhelming. Minhaj's breath caught in his throat as the figure stepped forward, its movements slow and deliberate. The figure raised a hand, pointing toward the courtyard. Minhaj's legs finally obeyed, and he bolted past it, the journal clutched to his chest. He ran through the house, not daring to look back, and burst into the courtyard. The disturbed earth beneath the tree seemed darker now, as though the ground itself had turned to shadow. A voice called to him, soft and melodic, from the base of the tree. It wasn't his grandfather's voice, nor was it a voice he recognized, but it carried a strange, hypnotic pull that made his steps falter. As he approached, the shadows beneath the tree began to shift, coalescing into a shape that rose slowly from the earth. Minhaj froze, his heart pounding as the figure took form. A woman, her face pale and gaunt, her eyes empty yet full of an unspoken menace. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came. Instead, the air filled with the whispers he had heard before, louder now